My grandfather told me, there's a reason our people never build near that canyon. The land remembers what we buried, and it remembers who disturbed it. That voice you just heard, that was Luther Nietzsche, senior ranger, tribal bloodline, federal clearance, a quiet man who patrolled the Fort APACHE reservation for almost 3 decades. He was respected for his steadiness, the kind of man who didn't flinch during flash floods, bear attacks, or forest fires. But what happened in March 2019, on the edge of the Devil's Backbone, took every piece of that steadiness and shattered it. His final recorded call was placed at 3:12 a.m. It wasn't routed through dispatch. It came through the emergency override channel, something rangers are told only to use if they're injured or if someone's dead. Except there was no report of an injury, no evidence of a fatality, just Luther's voice, tight and breaking at the edges. I need someone to come out to Devil's Backbone. Right now. Bring someone who knows the old songs. Something's opened. Then silence. No static, no shuffle, just dead air. They found his service vehicle 4 hours later, parked along a path that's long since disappeared from satellite maps. A game trail, overgrown and unrecorded. The engine was cold. The passenger door was open. One boot was on the floorboard. The other was 30 feet downhill in the brush, as if it had been thrown or abandoned in a hurry. Luther didn't reappear until 48 hours later. He walked into a tribal outpost at sunrise. No vehicle, no gear, drenched in sweat and soot. His uniform was shredded at the sleeves, his eyes unfocused. He collapsed just inside the doorway. He said one thing before he lost consciousness. It's listening again. The tribal council refused to release his medical file. No statement to the press, no footage from the wildlife cameras that had been operating in that area for nearly 7 months. Federal agents were seen at the border of the reservation 2 days later. They never entered, but they stayed parked on the highway for hours, watching. Luther was kept under observation for 9 days, and then, quietly, he was discharged, not to a hospital, but to his family's land near White River. He wouldn't speak to the media. He wouldn't return calls from the Forest Service, but he left behind something else. A series of audio recordings, private ones, hidden beneath floorboards and passed to a tribal historian with one instruction. Don't play this while I'm alive, but don't let it stay buried either. You're about to hear the truth, told by a man who knew the forest better than anyone alive. And what he says will challenge the version of history we've been taught to believe. The idea that folklore fades, that tradition is just ceremony, that what we can't measure must not be real. What you're about to hear suggests something entirely different, that some places are not meant to be charted, that old boundaries aren't just territorial, they're protective, and that beneath the soil, under the very foundations of what we think is wilderness, something waits. In one of the recordings, Luther begins with a whisper. I broke the path open again, and now I can't stop hearing it. He's not talking about a creature. He doesn't use words like monster or demon. What he describes is a presence, a memory that isn't his, but moves inside him, that rewrites dreams, that pulls scent out of thin air, blood, ash, charred hide. He said it follows silence, that it arrives when your thoughts begin to still, that he'd started waking up to find dirt beneath his fingernails, even though he hadn't left his room. He said his trail cam footage was overwritten, always at the same time, 1:11 a.m., one frame every night. A figure with no visible outline, just a patch of darkness deeper than the night around it. He said it didn't chase, it didn't roar, it just stood, waiting. because it remembered the songs of the ancestors, and now that those songs were fading, it had room to stretch. Luther was a federal employee. He was trained in wilderness survival, GPS tracking, wildlife pathology, and emergency trauma care. And yet his descriptions sound nothing like science. They sound like ritual, like he was unearthing something his people had worked generations to suppress. In one recording, he says, "This wasn't just something we avoided. It was something we paid to keep quiet, in smoke, in silence, in memory." He claimed there were stones deep in the canyon that bear scratches. Not from tools, not from animals, but from fingertips. He claimed to see an elk collapse without a sound, its body sinking like it had been dropped from a height. But the trees were motionless. There was no wind, no tremor, no explanation. And above all, he said the ground itself hummed, low, just beneath hearing, like a voice waiting to be recognized. This is the beginning of Luther Nietzsche's confession, a record of what he saw. And what he believes followed him back. But this is only the first chapter, because Luther wasn't the first to see it. There are carvings on the reservation that match symbols found in northern Canada, Oaxaca, and even Siberia. Different tribes, different continents, same shapes, same warnings. So why are they here? What was buried in that canyon? And why did our ancestors walk away, refusing to speak its name again? In the chapters to come, we'll track the evidence. We'll speak to those who've seen it. We'll visit the places where official maps go silent. Because Luther gave us more than just a story. He gave us a trail, and we intend to follow it. This is MindFuel. Subscribe now. Share this with those who've heard the old names spoken in sleep. Because some truths weren't lost, they were sealed, and something is starting to remember. Before Luther Nietzsche ever stepped foot near Devil's Backbone, long before his final transmission, before the boot prints and the ash, this story belonged to someone else. A man who carried a silence even heavier than Luther's. His name was Joaquin Docella, grandson of a firekeeper, descendant of a medicine line traced back to the first mountain clans of the White Mountains. He was 22 when he came forward. His grandfather had died just 2 months prior. Joaquin didn't speak during the funeral. He didn't touch the casket. He stood motionless by the tree line, clutching a bundle wrapped in red buckskin, something his grandfather gave him on his last night alive. He told his cousin, who told a tribal recorder, who told us, that the old man's final words weren't a prayer. They were a plea. Keep the ashes. Don't burn again in that canyon. If you hear a voice in the flames, don't answer it. What does that mean? To most, just another fragment of grief-drenched poetry. But the elders, they knew, because they'd heard those words before. There's a story on the reservation, not widely told anymore. It wasn't taught in school. It wasn't passed down in bedtime tradition. It was shared in hushed rooms, with doors shut tight and smoke still curling from the bowls. A story about the hollow ones. They weren't gods. They weren't spirits. They were something emptier. According to the few who still remember, the hollow ones didn't exist until we made them. Not by accident, but by violation. It was 1947, a season of forced relocation. Tribal land was being repurposed, surveyed, cleared, cataloged by federal agents who had no understanding of what they were trespassing on. That spring, a burial site was excavated, not for research, for infrastructure. A fire road. What was taken, no one knows for certain, only that the stones were moved. The earth was bulldozed, and within the week, a worker vanished. His name wasn't recorded, but his boots were found, placed upright, side by side, at the mouth of the canyon, as if he'd stepped out of them and walked into something else. 2 nights later, an elder tasked with tending the ceremonial fire A man named Asa reported something impossible. Asa was alone, midway through a prayer vigil, feeding the flames cedar and bone sage. He told his brother the flame twisted, turned pale white, and inside it, he saw a face. Not human, not animal, something in between, shifting. It didn't scream, it didn't howl. It said his name, once, then again. But the voice didn't come from outside, it came from inside the fire. He tried to back away, but couldn't. His knees locked, his lungs froze. The voice whispered once more, not louder, but closer. Asa. The next morning, Asa was found slumped beside the ashes, eyes wide, lips cracked, fingernails torn from both hands, embedded in the dirt as if he'd tried to crawl away without moving. He never spoke again. That was the first recorded incident, but it wasn't the last. Over the following months, whispers spread. Hunters returning with nosebleeds, children waking with scratches on their backs in the shape of pine needles. One man claimed his reflection lagged in the river, blinking slower than he did, watching long after he walked away. But the fire, that was always the beginning. The old ones said the hollow ones don't show themselves, not like an animal, not even like a spirit. They learn, mimic. They listen through the flames. That's why, for years, the tribe banned all fire rituals near the backbone. Not because of drought, but because the fires answered back. Joaquin's grandfather was among the last fire keepers to serve in silence. He said he never saw a hollow one outright, but he smelled them. They came with heat, not warmth, but a dry, oxygenless pressure, the feeling of breath being stolen before it reaches your lungs. He kept a pouch of ashes from every sacred fire he tended, not out of reverence, but out of containment. He believed the fire never fully died, that even its smoke remembered the voice inside it. Before he died, he gave Joaquin that pouch, said it had to be returned to the place of origin, but never reopened. He warned, "The fire can't see us if we stay quiet, but if you answer it, it won't stop calling." Luther Nietzsche didn't know any of this when he became a ranger. The files were buried, the testimonies never digitized, the names passed down only in whispers and warnings, but the ground never forgets. When Luther described the night he heard his own name, coming not from the trees, not from the wind, but from a pile of burning underbrush, he didn't know the story of Asa Begay, but the details matched, down to the silence, the locking of limbs, the smell of cedar twisted into something too clean, too dry. He didn't run. He stayed until the last coal blackened, and he said that just before the fire died, he saw a shape pull backward from the light, not from the shadows, but from within the flame itself, like it had been staring back the entire time. What do you do when the stories you've dismissed as folklore start to repeat themselves? When the names echo through generations, from Asa to Luther, and now to us? There are voices in these forests, and they don't belong to coyotes, or owls, or wind. They belong to something older, something born when memory was stolen from sacred ground. And if Joaquin's grandfather was right, the fire was never ours to control. It was their mirror, their door, their invitation, one we've already accepted. This is MindFuel, and this is only Chapter 1. Subscribe to stay with us, because what you've just heard, that's only the beginning. We haven't even reached the place the government tried to seal. We haven't opened the pouch. We haven't heard what Luther said in his last recording. But we will. And when we do, you'll understand this wasn't a haunting. This was we were told never to build there. We were told never to burn there. But the one thing that keeps coming back is that we should never have slept there. In October 2022, a man named Ethan Geller crossed into an area on the western edge of the White Mountains, just 15 miles from Devil's Backbone. He wasn't a thrill seeker. He wasn't a ghost hunter. He was a minimalist backpacker, solo, methodical, documented everything. His GPS logs show a clear, deliberate path. But there's a 2-mile stretch, a deviation he didn't plan. According to his own notes, he left the main trail due to a noise. A low hum, he wrote. Sounds like a generator, but there's nothing out here. Too rhythmic. I feel it in my jaw. He veered off trail sometime around 4:30 p.m. By 6 p.m., he had unknowingly entered what tribal maps mark, privately and without signage, as a no-cross zone. The elders don't refer to it by name, only by function. They call it the unspoken ground. Ethan set up camp that night, and like always, he filmed a brief vlog before sleeping. Camped off trail, somewhere above the canyon rim. Really quiet here. No planes, no bugs, weirdly, no bugs. Air smells dry, like the desert, but it rained yesterday. Feels like I'm in a place that hasn't been touched in a long time. Almost too long. He laughs at his own words, but it's tight, nervous. The kind of laugh you give when your instincts raise a hand, but your logic tells them to sit down. What he didn't realize was that his tent was less than 300 feet from an abandoned fire circle. An old one. Faded, broken, half covered in dry grass and volcanic stone. The kind of place only the wind remembers how to reach. We've reviewed his recordings. The first sign is so subtle you might miss it. At 1:41 a.m., the wind begins to shift. Not in speed, in shape. It rises, pulls back, then returns, exactly 22 seconds apart. Like breathing. It continues for 13 minutes. Then, at 1:54, it stops. Completely. Then the sound of Ethan's voice captured from outside his tent. "Hey, I think someone's sleeping just outside my tent." But there's something off. His voice isn't panicked. It's calm, almost uninterested, like someone commenting on the weather. Then another voice responds. Same words, same cadence. "Hey, I think someone's sleeping just outside my tent." Only quieter and slightly off pitch, like a second Ethan learning how to speak. The next morning, there was no transmission, no movement logged on the GPS, no change in battery status. But the video camera kept rolling. At 4:33 a.m., there's a long dragging noise, like fabric across stone. Then the tent collapses, not from wind, not from weight, from inside. When a search party was finally dispatched, 3 days later, they found the tent folded perfectly, gear untouched, food sealed, camera propped upright on a flat rock. But no Ethan, no tracks, no sign of struggle, no signs of departure, just his journal. One entry, written backward, letter by letter, like someone was trying to remember how writing works. It watched me breathe, then it practiced. The hollow ones were never described as creatures, not in the carvings, not in the chants. They were described as emptiness that learns. When Joaquin's grandfather warned, "Don't answer the fire," he didn't mean don't speak. He meant don't respond to your own echo. Because the moment you do, the moment you acknowledge what sounds like you, it begins the trade. The elders say they come from places where burial was violated, where flame was misused, where memory was torn up by machines and silence was filled with the wrong voices. In these places, the hollow ones find shelter, not in caves, not in dens, but in us. They learn how we walk, how we speak, how we fear, and once they've learned enough, they wait. Just outside your tent, on the edge of your fire, or behind your own voice, repeating your thoughts back to you, half a second too late. Ethan was the first civilian in decades to enter that area, and the first to vanish without a storm, a fall, or a predator. He wasn't attacked. He was studied, and now what mimicked him might not be done. Because in the final seconds of his camera's memory, there's one more voice, faint, dry, words formed not by lips, but by memory itself. I'm him now. This is MindFuel. And this story, it's not just unfolding, it's waking up. Subscribe now, share this chapter, because the farther we go into this forest, the more we understand. These stories weren't superstition. They were instructions, warnings left like markers in the dirt, and we've already stepped past them. There's something wrong with the footprints. That's what first stood out when the search teams returned from the last 3 disappearances. Not the lack of blood, not the clean-cut silence left at the scenes, not even the perfectly packed supplies. It was the tracks, long, bare, inhumanly wide-toed, pressed deep into shale and loam as if the body above them carried no skin, only weight. They began, always, at the edge of the campsite. Never before, never leading in, only leading away. And they went farther than they should have, miles across hard rock, through rivers, no faltering, no shift in weight. As if the thing walking wasn't learning how to walk at all. It already knew. It just wanted someone to see it now. The first, to speak plainly, was a veteran ranger named Derek Tso, stationed near the Black River sector. He'd been part of the recovery teams during the '98 flash floods. He'd seen what it looked like when nature claimed a person. But what he saw here wasn't natural. 2 years ago, he found prints, over 20 of them, leading uphill across jagged basalt. And these weren't boot marks. They were raw. You could see the indent of toe joints, the split of what might have been a heel, and streaks, wet, reddish streaks, as if the feet weren't finished being feet. Derek didn't make a report. He didn't call dispatch. He turned around, walked 5 miles, back in silence, resigned 2 weeks later. We spoke to an Apache tracker, a man named Rylan Hashke, one of the few still trained in traditional trailing practices. When we showed him photos of the tracks, he refused to touch the prints. He said only one word, "Chuke." It translates roughly to that which wears nothing. More accurately, that which does not own skin. In older stories, it's not described by appearance, but by what it lacks. It doesn't grow. It doesn't belong. It copies, imperfectly, always one step behind what it pretends to be. The tribe says it came after the fire lines were broken, after sacred sites were razed, and the bones of the sleeping were turned. They say Chauke has no face of its own, so it learns ours, slowly, clumsily, and when it gets close enough to being human, it leaves its prints behind. The oldest known encounter with it may not be myth, it may be video. Found buried in a box of VHS tapes from a shuttered ranger station, Ridgepost 12, closed in the late 1990s. Most of the tapes are standard. Weather logs, equipment checks, staff sleeping on cots. But one tape, dated March 5th, 1996, has no label, just static. And then, movement. It's night vision, green, grainy. The camera is pointed toward the base of the station, and something's moving underneath it. Not walking, crawling. Elbows first, pulling itself forward like it doesn't quite understand knees. Its back arches, sharp, shoulders jerk out of sync, like too many bones in the wrong order. It pauses, and that's when you see it turn. The face, or the attempt at one. Lips, too wide, stretched like damp paper, eyes that don't focus, like they're painted on, but starting to slide. And then it opens its mouth, and nothing comes out. But the screen begins to flicker. The image wobbles like the thing inside the lens is looking back through it. When the ranger found the tape weeks later, the recorder had no battery. The door had never been opened. But beneath the floorboards, there were handprints. Not footprints. Handprints. Pressed from underneath, like something wanted to crawl upward. This is what the trackers won't follow, what they refuse to speak of in daylight. Because Chuke doesn't chase you. It doesn't steal you. It replaces you. Bit by bit. It wears your footsteps like gloves. Tears off its failures and starts again. And if you see it, if you lock eyes before it's done learning, you never sleep the same again. Not because it's hunting you, but because somewhere, something is practicing you. We didn't want to believe it. We wanted a logical pattern, a predator, a person. But that's the horror, isn't it? When something keeps showing up in the margins, too quiet, too incomplete to catch, until it starts to wear your reflection like skin. Ethan Geller's voice, the breathing around Luther's fire, the tracks with no souls, the mimic with unfinished lips. They weren't isolated. They were the same thing. Learning, repeating, becoming. Narrator. Slow fade, grim, but steady. This is MindFuel. If you're still watching, don't stop. Not now. Because the next chapter contains footage that was never meant for the public. A transmission from Luther Nietzsche, recovered, restored, and never aired until now. We'll show you what he saw, what he heard, and what called to him by name in the fire. Subscribe to stay with us. Because if these stories are true, we haven't been alone in these woods for a long, long time. There's a sound the elders say should never echo. Laughter. Not in the canyons, not when the sun dips low, and never when you're alone. Because in the stories passed through firelight and breath, laughter was never a sign of joy. It was a signal, a call from what was buried, what was never meant to return. Thomas Baki, a tribal historian and linguist, spoke to us under the condition we film nothing. No cameras, no phones, just audio. He said the land has ears. He told us of the Tseyaji, the laughing stones. Black shale fragments, long and thin, with carvings that don't match any known Apache dialect. And more importantly, they weren't carved by hand. They were worn into shape by something that circled them, over and over again, as if whispering could etch stone. In the legend, these stones were once used in a battle, a war, not against men or beasts, but against something that came from beneath. Something that moved like men, but had no breath. Things that wore bones like clothing. They say the stones were laughter made solid, a sound trapped inside matter. Not a weapon, not a curse, but a message from them to us. We are not gone. We are only resting. After the battle, these stones were gathered, buried far beneath the lowest points of the canyon floor where water never pooled and roots never grew, covered in salt, ash, and the names of the last war priests who walked the old ground. For centuries, silence held. But silence is fragile, and the land never forgets what's placed inside it. In the last 8 years, seismic shifts and heavy rains have begun peeling the canyon walls open. Locals hiking the side trails, those that cut too close to the cliff veins, have reported something strange. Laughter, carried on no wind, attached to no body, and always coming from below the tree line, where the echoes shouldn't reach. One voice said, it sounded like a man. Another said a child. But the most disturbing account came from a woman named Inez Lowry, who lived near Dry Echo Basin. She wasn't just hearing laughter, she was hearing her own. Each dusk, as the sun turned the rocks orange, the canyon below her property would return a sound she hadn't made since she was a girl. Her childhood laugh. The same rhythm, same pitch, same wound beneath it. And it wasn't a memory. She recorded it, played it for her brother. He confirmed it. It was the laugh she had when they used to run from dogs at the old post line. But it wasn't just echoing, it was repeating. evolving, getting closer. When researchers visited the site weeks later, they found something buried at the edge of a dried runoff path. A thin shard of black shale, cold, even in the afternoon heat. And when placed against recording equipment, it hummed. Not in vibration, not in tone, in cadence. The spectrogram showed a waveform that mimicked laughter, distorted, low-pitched, warped by time. And over the course of 7 hours, that laughter began to split into separate voices. 12 of them. Each slightly different. Each layered in time. What does that mean? Thomas believes the stones don't just contain sound. They learn from sound. And once unearthed, they begin to speak back. 1 week after the discovery, a forest technician monitoring erosion sensors heard laughter just before sunset. She didn't record it. Didn't have time. Because just beneath the edge of the wash line, she saw a face. Not formed from stone, not carved, but emerging. Slowly, like a root being pulled from beneath mud. It had no mouth, no eyes, just creases where features should be. But the laughter came from it. Clear, cruel, mocking. And the moment she turned to run, it stopped. Not like silence. Like it learned what fear sounds like, and had no more use for her. Narrator, grim. We asked Thomas what the stones truly are. He hesitated, then said, "They're recordings of something we defeated, but didn't destroy." He believes when enough of them resurface, the laughter will no longer be distant. It will no longer need to echo. It will step forward, wearing our joy, our memories, our mistakes, and when it finally speaks in full, we may not be able to tell it apart from ourselves. These aren't ghost stories. They're fault lines, cracks in something old and buried that never agreed to stay down. And with every laugh returned to the air, we're not just remembering them. They're remembering us. This is MindFuel. And the next chapter holds the full transmission from Luther Nietzsche. Footage found on a scorched tape, recovered from a fire that shouldn't have happened. And what it contains may change everything. Subscribe, stay alert, because some of the voices we hear in the woods aren't calling for help. They're calling us back. We were never supposed to see the body. That's what the email said. Encrypted, anonymous. One line in the subject field. You'll know it by what's missing. No coordinates, no name, just a photo, a carcass, half buried in red clay, curled unnaturally. And beside it, a gloved hand holding a sample vial. Label, a P14, unidentified tissue mass, recovered Black River perimeter, do not catalog. What was found that day wasn't listed in federal logs. It wasn't reported to any wildlife agency. And the Apache Nation denied any official recovery on tribal land. But the photo metadata said otherwise. Date stamp, March 11th, 2021. Location, Ridgepost Fire Line, Zone 3, 10 miles south of the last reported Chuka sighting. According to a biogeneticist, who has since gone silent, samples were taken. Tissue, bone marrow, blood. Shipped in plain containers marked Unknown Apex Control Sample. The lab was private, high-level, contracted for field research in hybrid fauna. They ran the DNA in 3 tiers. Tier 1, 99.3% match to human genome. Hairless. Bipeds, adult physiology. Tier 2, partial gene sequencing interrupted. Markers with no correlating entries in any known mammalian reference bank. Tier 3, 1 strand terminated the sequence, auto-canceled the readout, as if the machine couldn't process it. The log said, sequence encountered recursive behavior, restarting. Again and again. Like the code was trying to rewrite itself. That's not how DNA works. You don't get behavior from a strand of genetic material. It doesn't restart. It doesn't protect itself. But this one did. And within 24 hours, the researcher assigned to the project, Dr. Aaron Valor, resigned. No formal statement, no press release, just a note, left-hand written, folded into his lab badge. It read, "It bleeds like us, but it's not us. Stop digging." He left the badge in the freezer where the sample was held. The camera in the cold room shorted out at 3:17 a.m. When it came back online, the vial was empty. The report never reached the press. But internal files from that facility, leaked to our team, included notes scrawled in the margins of the test logs. Skin forms, post-mortem. Bones reverse load-bearing strain. Teeth misaligned, 72 inches in upper jaw, no molars. And the most chilling one of all, no fingerprint data. Entire epidermis, smoothed, as if borrowed. This wasn't a birth defect. It wasn't mutation. It was deliberate, purposeful, as if something had attempted to imitate a human body from memory. And it had gotten most of it right, but not all. A whistleblower from the same lab, who contacted us under the alias Milo, shared one final transcript. A voice memo left on the researcher's personal server. The sample's breaking down. It's decaying like it knows we're looking. The blood reacts to pressure. When we ran the glucose test, it turned black. Not coagulated, aware. Aaron touched it with a pipette, and it followed. It followed the tip like a magnet, like it wanted to be part of him. This isn't blood. This is a blueprint, and it's looking for a new place to build. We asked Milo what happened to Aaron. His reply was a single photo, a black SUV, unmarked, parked at the base of a ravine, the passenger door wide open, the seatbelt torn in half. No sign of struggle, just that empty vial on the ground. And next to it, a footprint with no tread. What bled on Apache land isn't in our medical texts. It's not part of the tree of life as we know it. It carries enough human to pass the test, just enough to fool our tools. But in the marrow, in the deepest code, it doesn't belong here. It's not invasive. It's already here. And it's been learning, adapting, wearing our DNA like a second skin. They tried to bury it in stone, in myth, in unmarked zones, and burned down ranger stations. But the thing we tried to forget remembers every part of us we leave behind. And if it bleeds, then it learns. And if it learns, it waits. This is MindFuel, and next, we show you the tape. The one recovered from Luther Nietzsche's fire tower. He thought he was alone. He wasn't. Subscribe. Watch carefully. And whatever you do, don't trust your own reflection in the dark. Most forests remember you. They hold your footprints in the soft rot of the trail. Let your scent linger for hours after you've gone. Even a snapped branch stays as proof. You were there. You were real. But deep in a region marked only by tribal maps and silence, there's a stretch of land where the trees do something different. They don't mark you. They don't hold you. They unmake you. Completely. It began with a casual overnight trip. 3 hikers, friends since college. They weren't locals. They didn't know the land, and they never saw the warnings etched into bark miles before the canyon line. Their names were logged at a trailhead in Whisper Ridge, on the edge of tribal jurisdiction. They brought supplies, GPS units, video gear. They even posted on social media, going off-grid for 48 hours, wish us luck. 48 hours passed, then 72, then 5 days. On the 6th day, a man emerged from the brush at the ranger checkpoint. Alone. Disheveled. Sunburned. Dehydrated but lucid. He gave his name, Mark Rivens. And when the officer asked where the others were, Mark just stared. Blank, still, and then said, "What others?" He didn't know who he came with. Didn't recognize their names. Didn't remember the photos. Even when shown footage of himself laughing beside his girlfriend, his best friend behind him, he insisted the video was fake, manipulated. He claimed he'd hiked alone. Had always hiked alone. That no one else had come. He didn't even remember being in a relationship. But when they searched his bag, they found a ring, wrapped in cloth, engraved with her name, Elise. A therapist assigned to Mark noticed something disturbing during his recovery. He had recurring dreams, always the same. Elise standing at the forest edge, turning to speak, but her mouth was gone. Not injured, not obscured, erased. As if the forest hadn't just taken her body, it had removed the idea of her voice, like a memory hollowed out from the inside. Mark would wake up gasping, not from fear, but from confusion. Each time, he'd ask the nurse the same question. Who's Elise? We brought Mark's case to a tribal elder, Naltsus Bahi, a medicine man who once oversaw funerary rites in the Red Valley Basin. He didn't ask to see Mark, didn't need to. He simply said, if the forest gave him back, it gave him back different. You can't follow what has no shadow. We asked what he meant. He told us the stories his grandfather passed down, of a forest that doesn't kill with teeth, doesn't drag you into caves or leave bones behind. Instead, it waits for those who don't belong, not by blood or tribe, but by memory. And when it finds one, it takes everything that remembers them, their friends, their family, their face in old photos, even the sound of their name when spoken aloud. He said, that forest doesn't just take people, it erases them. In the weeks that followed, digital traces of the missing hikers began vanishing. Tagged posts removed, phone numbers invalid, facial recognition failing on their IDs. Even the emergency contact numbers listed for them, disconnected. One ranger looked through the trail log from that day. Mark's name was there, but there were no other entries, no initials, no handwriting beside his. When they checked the original paper file, there were 2 blank lines where the other names should have been, indented as if someone had written and erased them before the ink even dried. What kind of place has the power to reach backwards, to rip out threads from a tapestry without leaving fray? What lives in soil so ancient it can whisper into the structure of memory itself? Some say this land is cursed. Others believe it's a threshold, a thin space where thought becomes prey. But whatever it is, it doesn't just hunger for flesh. It feeds on recognition. And once it's taken your place in the world, there's no place left for you to return to. So when you step onto ground that doesn't welcome you, don't just listen for footsteps behind. Count your memories. Feel the weight of the names you carry. And ask yourself, would anyone know if one of them went missing? Because sometimes, when the forest forgets, so does everyone else. This is MindFuel. And in the next chapter, we examine the tapes pulled from the sealed archives. The footage that officials said didn't exist, but it's there. And it shows something watching from the treetops. Something that remembers everything we try to forget. Subscribe. Stay aware. And if your dreams begin to change, don't trust what's missing. There are places in the Apache Nation where no one builds, not because of treaties, not because of permits, but because the land has already made its decision. It remembers what stood there and what was burned to the ground. Between 1954 and 1958, 7 structures were intentionally destroyed on sovereign land. They were never mapped, never archived, no formal records of demolition, and no permits filed for the fires that consumed them. All that remains are faded outlines, scorched into dry soil. Foundations blackened so deep that nothing grows there, no moss, no weeds, not even insects. They were purged according to tribal sources, burned not just for what they were, but for what had taken root inside them. But the fires did not end it, because last winter, smoke was reported, not just once, but but over 3 separate nights, in areas long declared sterile by both tribal wardens and government surveyors. The sightings began near Dead Man's Turn, a location that hasn't been accessible since the controlled blaze of 1961. Park rangers saw it first, a faint column of gray rising where nothing had stood in decades. They dispatched drones, thermal, infrared, night vision enabled, and what they captured, no one was prepared for. In the drone feed, the landscape appears as expected: ash, charcoal ridges, scorched trees like skeletal fingers. But 37 seconds in, movement. Figures. 4 of them, walking in wide, slow circles, in the exact footprint of the old community center that burned in 1957. No tents, no signs of camping, no roads leading in or out. They were barefoot, covered in soot, skin slick and reflective in the heat scan, too smooth, too uniform. At first, it seemed like some forgotten ritual, but then one of the figures, a woman in a torn dress, stopped. She turned her face upward and locked eyes with the drone. She smiled, the kind of smile you don't forget, because it wasn't one of greeting. It wasn't even human, really. It was the act of smiling, mimicry, something performing emotion, with none of it behind the eyes. Then the feed cut to static. The drone was later found in 2 pieces, melted, no signs of impact, just warped as if from intense heat, yet no fire damage in the brush below. The GPS unit on board reset itself to a default year, 1901, and the footage, which should have streamed to cloud backup, was missing everything after the woman's face appeared. We only know what we saw because the drone technician had screen recorded the test flight on a separate laptop. He was fired the next day, and his laptop was seized. But we have the mirrored copy. According to oral tradition, the buildings were not simply haunted. They were anchors, structures that held something in place, a force that wasn't meant to move beyond those walls. When the fires were set, that anchor was broken, not destroyed, just loosed, and the spirits inside, if you can even call them that, didn't burn. They changed. A medicine woman who spoke with us under condition of anonymity described it this way: they weren't cleansed, they were set free. Some burn and vanish, but the old ones, they burn and they keep walking. One of the structures that burned was a council hall where tribal disputes were once resolved. No one had entered it in over 50 years, until last autumn, when 2 poachers stumbled across it while fleeing border patrol. Only one was ever found, mouth blistered shut, eyes clouded. When asked what happened to his partner, he just said, "She walked into the black house, the one that wasn't there, until we looked at it." The fires were supposed to be an end, but they were a door. And now, that door opens on its own. So if you're hiking out there and the wind smells like ash, but there's no fire and no smoke, look again. You might not be standing alone, because sometimes what we burn doesn't disappear. Sometimes it waits in the shape of what we destroyed. And sometimes it looks up and smiles. This is MindFuel. And in our next chapter, The Ones Who Whisper Through Stone. A cave recently uncovered by erosion. Inside, handprints burned into the walls, on the inside. And a language no linguist can place, but every Apache elder recognizes. They say it's not human speech. They say it's not meant to be heard by the living. Subscribe, keep watching, and whatever you hear next, don't answer. Some stories are forgotten, some are erased, and some are buried. Intentionally. Shoved into folders stamped classified, locked in basements with no windows, in filing cabinets that hum under fluorescent lights. But the forest never signed a confidentiality agreement. The dead never took a loyalty oath. And in 2023, a record dump of declassified material forced open a door someone tried to keep shut for over 70 years. At the center of it, a name scratched into black ink and secrecy. Operation Canyon. Silence. 1951. The documents were thin, most pages heavily redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out, names removed, timestamps altered, but some fragments remained. Engaged objective Alpha 9 at 0320 hours. Artifacts located. Immediate containment initiated. Audio contamination noted. Source unknown. Unstable. Artifacts. Audio contamination. Unstable. The terminology was vague by design, but one thing stood out clearly. This wasn't an exploration. It was a removal. A purge. Operation Canyon Silence deployed 17 military agents into a restricted section of tribal land after a failed negotiation with tribal elders regarding ancient cave systems. What they were after remains unclear. What they found was never explained. But the audio tells part of the story, recovered from an old magnetic reel, unlabeled, water-damaged. The file was marked only with a series of numbers. 17BX.56FRAG. What it captured was never meant to reach ears outside the intelligence community. The first 47 seconds are nothing but gravel, crunching under boots, distant radio static. Then, a scream, sudden, human, high and fast, like something breaking open, followed by laughter. But this wasn't laughter from relief. It wasn't nervous or accidental. It was forced, drawn out, like something wringing it from inside the lungs. More screams follow, then gunfire, then more laughter, but from multiple sources now, layered, echoing strangely, as if the canyons themselves were repeating the sound. One voice can be heard yelling, almost unintelligible, "Get out of their mouths! Get out!" Then silence. A long, steady hum, and just before the tape cuts, "They're speaking through our dead. Only one man survived. Corporal Daniel Reese. Medical discharge. No interview, no press, no statement. He moved to Portales, New Mexico, where he lived alone. Never spoke publicly. No family, no friends. His name surfaces only once in a psychiatric memo dated 1964. Subject refuses to speak. But sometimes at night, he stands in corners for hours, listening. Reese died in 1991 by his own hand. He left behind a single-page note. It was unsigned, written in pencil, smudged but still legible. They spoke through our dead. They wore their voices like masks, and the more we killed, the louder they became. Following Operation Canyon, silence, a chain of executive directives sealed off the area permanently. No civilian entry, no logging, no aerial surveys. Even satellite imaging was distorted deliberately. Low-resolution overlays placed atop the region. Pixelated anomalies dismissed as software error. We now know this. A cave was found. Artifacts were taken, and men were changed by something that was already there. Something ancient enough to speak without words, and cruel enough to use the bodies of the dead as translators. The laughter caught on that tape? Experts say it contains frequencies not producible by the human throat, and under spectrographic analysis, a second voice appears inside it, not layered, but embedded, as if someone or something was writing the sound. It wasn't possession, it wasn't illusion, it was occupation. Whatever was in that cave didn't need to touch you to use you. It just needed your silence. And the moment you listened, you weren't alone anymore. When questioned by Senate investigators in 1972, a surviving intelligence officer responded only once. "We didn't dig deep. The hole was already there. We just pulled the lid off." This wasn't an isolated event. This wasn't some fringe conspiracy. It was a government-sanctioned breach of sacred ground. And what came out of that ground hasn't gone back. This is MindFuel. And in the next chapter, we, the ones who whisper through stone, Inside the cave, handprints scorched into the walls from the inside, symbols older than any human alphabet, and the sound that should never be played aloud. Subscribe. And remember, they don't need your belief to be real, only your silence. Long before a name was spoken, before ink-stained government paper, and before redacted maps erased the borders of memory, they were already here. The old ones didn't draw them. They didn't carve them. They didn't speak of them, not even in metaphor. Because in Apache belief, some truths are not passed down. They pass through. But now, the children are remembering, and they're remembering what no one ever told them. It began in a K-3 classroom at the San Carlos Apache Reservation School. A substitute teacher assigned a basic drawing prompt. Sketch a dream you've had. What she received were 8 crayon drawings, each different, each vivid, but all sharing one impossible detail. A tall, eyeless figure, long arms, no skin, and a mouth where the stomach should be. Some drew it standing, others crawling on all fours. One child labeled it with shaky handwriting, the one that smiles like fire. No parents had ever mentioned stories like this. No TV shows, no books. And yet, the figure appeared again and again across separate grades, in separate households, as if the memory was returning from somewhere older than memory. Tribal elders who reviewed the images went still, not with fear, but recognition. They called it Dee Biyaji Nasha, the Hollow Ones' return. It's not a legend they speak aloud, not even during council, only in whispers, only behind closed doors, and only when the moon is dark. Because, they say, this isn't about haunting. It's about a cycle, a slow turning of something too large for human time, something that moves not yearly, but every 70 years. The last recorded mass disappearance in this region occurred in 1952. Entire hunting parties vanished. Entire households left meals uneaten, chairs overturned, no signs of struggle, no tracks, no witnesses, just silence. And before that? 1882. A settler family of 6 found miles from their property, lined up shoulder to shoulder in a dry wash, eyes open, mouths packed with silt. No injuries, no signs of trauma, just taken, and then placed, as if arranged by something that didn't understand us, but wanted to recreate our rituals. This year marks 70 years since 1952, and something has begun again. It started with a boy named Elijah. He had just turned 7. He was bright, curious, always drawing, always asking questions. But something changed in him after his birthday. He began to hum, constantly, even in his sleep. And then one morning, he was gone. No broken windows, no forced doors, just an open screen and a trail of small, barefoot prints in the sand leading toward the canyon. They found him 2 days later, naked, cold, kneeling at the mouth of a crevice no adult had dared enter in decades. He was humming something unfamiliar, a tune with no scale, no origin, the pattern looping back on itself in a rhythm that didn't belong to childhood. When they approached, he began to speak. A chant, soft, rhythmic, like he was remembering it phonetically, not in his voice, but through his mouth. Tribal linguists could not identify the language. It bore no root in Apache, Navajo, Ute, or any known regional dialect. But every elder who heard it froze, because the cadence matched something far older, a rhythm heard in certain caves, a pattern carved into stone near the base of Owl Ridge, where no one carves anymore. They didn't translate it, they didn't try. They covered their ears, and one of them wept. Elijah doesn't speak now, not English, not Apache, not even in song. He just stares, sometimes smiling, sometimes turning his head to listen when there's no sound at all. And at night, his parents say he doesn't sleep, He just sits and waits. The cycle has returned, and the hollow ones have come back. Not as story, not as memory, but as something drawn by a child who should have never known them. This is MindFuel. And in the next chapter, the ones who whisper through stone. The cave opens deeper than anyone thought. Inside, markings that weren't etched but grown, and sounds that can't be recorded, only felt. Subscribe. And if your child draws something with too many arms, with too many mouths, don't ask them where they saw it. They didn't. They remembered. There are places you don't dig. Not because of folklore, not because of curses, but because the earth itself pushes back. Every culture has them. Zones of silence, of disappearance, of watching. But in the stretch of land east of the Salt River, near a collapsed arroyo where maps blur and satellite feeds stutter, there is a place that's never been named. At least, not in words spoken aloud. The elders call it the folded earth. They don't visit, they don't point, they just stop walking when the wind changes. But in 2022, a group of amateur archaeologists did more than point. They dug, 5 men and 1 woman, out-of-state plates, drone rigs, pickaxes, and a shallow obsession with pre-Columbian myths. They had watched the wrong forums, read the wrong blogs. They weren't searching for answers. They were searching for content. And what they found was sealed under 2 feet of stone and 1,000 years of warning. The entrance wasn't shaped like a cave. It looked arranged, symmetrical. A narrow vertical slit between 2 slabs of basalt, like a wound that had scabbed over and then been forced open again. Their equipment began failing the moment they passed inside. GoPros blinked to static. Thermal cams froze. Even analog watches stopped, as though time itself didn't want to tick inside this place. But the microphones kept running. And what they captured can still be heard on the recovered files. Footsteps, breathing, a voice whispering, "Why are there so many?" Another, "They're not all human." Then silence. Then a slow sound, like something unfolding. Inside that narrow passage was a chamber. No light, no airflow, no signs of burial, no carvings, no offerings. Just skulls, hundreds of them. Lined like bricks along the walls, jawless, eye sockets too wide, and each one bearing teeth. Not filed, not shaped, grown, naturally, razor-edged, and wrong. The largest skull measured nearly 14 inches across the brow, the smallest fit in the palm of a hand, but carried the same row of glistening, serrated teeth. The group didn't leave immediately. They took samples, touched bones, laughed nervously into the echo. One of them whispered into the recorder, "What if they're still down here?" And another voice, not part of the group, responded. Not clearly, not loudly, but unmistakably, "They are." That was the last clean audio recorded from inside the folded earth. Every device shut down seconds later. Footage ends abruptly. The last clip captured shows their primary camera shaking violently. A smear of motion. And a voice, low, afraid, almost childlike, whispering into the lens. They're awake now. Only 2 members of the group returned from the dig. Neither gave a formal statement. Both deleted their social accounts within hours of returning to Phoenix. They don't respond to messages. They've never resurfaced on camera. But one posted a photo, just once, before it disappeared. It showed a handprint burned into the stone beside the cave entrance. Not painted, fused, as though someone tried to hold the wall from the inside. There are no permits, no names on file. But local land surveyors now report motion-activated alarms going off near that arroyo, with nothing visible on playback. Just gaps, timestamps skipped, as though time itself doesn't want to remember what passed through. And the elders? They've started meeting again. Not in public, not in ceremony, but privately. One of them was overheard saying, We should have sealed it with more than stone. They weren't buried to be honored. They weren't hidden to be studied. They were sealed. Because even death doesn't close the mouth of something that remembers what it used to be. This is MindFuel. And in the next chapter, the ones who whisper through stone. Inside the tunnels where echoes speak in reverse and names are etched that no language can translate. One survivor, no tongue, and a message carved into his chest from the inside out. Subscribe. And if you find a place the wind refuses to enter, don't. Because the moment you dig, you are no longer alone. You hear him say it, soft, like a prayer that failed to save anyone the first time. We buried them deep, but now they've remembered the way out. Coming next on MindFuel, the chant that never ends. Field audio recovered from beneath a canyon ledge, a chant still echoing, though no mouths remain to speak it. No bodies, just sound, endless and wrong. Subscribe now, because something is speaking, and every video brings you closer to hearing your name in the dark. This is where the story ends, not with a scream, not with a grave, but with a map, an image pulled from a classified military satellite, declassified only after the wrong folder was leaked. Coordinates: Arizona-New Mexico border. Timestamp: 3:17 a.m. Infrared active. The terrain shows nothing unusual at first glance. Ridges, dust lines, wind-stripped plateaus, until you look just beneath the surface. From below the canyon floor, deep inside the folded earth, heat signatures begin to bloom. Not gas, not thermal decay, but movement. Coordinated, rhythmic, pulsing. Something, many somethings, are moving under the ground. No tunnels were recorded there, no cave systems charted, and yet every 43 seconds every flare moves closer to the surface. In the weeks that followed, 3 national parks were abruptly closed, all in the Four Corners region. No announcements, no press briefings, only signs posted at trailheads. Extreme fire risk. But no wildfires were reported. No smoke, no damage, only equipment failures, only missing hikers, only temporary fencing, with no clear perimeter. They weren't warning people about flames. They were warning them about what's under the ash. The truth wasn't lost. It was buried. Buried in stories passed by firelight. Buried in faces carved into stone no outsider ever learned to read. Buried in chants that looped for generations, not to summon anything, but to keep it under. The Apache remembered. They held the warning, and for a time the silence held. But silence doesn't last when the soil itself forgets to hold its breath. They buried the truth. The Apache kept the warning, but no one listened. And now, it's loose. This is MindFuel, and what you've just seen is real. The dates, the footage, the testimony, they all point in the same direction. There is a memory inside this land that refuses to stay buried. And something inside that memory is waking. Subscribe now, because this isn't folklore. It isn't mythology. It's the first chapter of what's coming next. And if your name echoes where it shouldn't, if your voice answers when you haven't spoken, then you've already stepped too close.